Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2016 to 2017 series Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love. This series is written by Sarah Vaughn, who sadly hasn't done a whole lot yet, with art by Lon Medina, he of Fables fame, and the first Filipino to win the coveted Eisner. Good for you, Lon. It's about the DC character Boston Brand, also known as Deadman, who is the ghost of a circus daredevil. Lots of tragic circus backgrounds in DC. Deadman often gets used largely for comedic purposes, so as you can probably guess from Stephanie Hahn's super gothic cover art, this comic isn't exactly his usual affair. But don't judge too much by that cover, because if I was going just off that image, I would probably assume this had something to do with Castlevania. Instead, this is an almost surprisingly conventional ghost story wrapped around a notably unconventional love story, set just enough in the DC universe to have one character make an appearance, nothing more. In fact, if you simply took Boston out and replaced him with a different ghost character, it probably wouldn't change the story in the slightest. Let's go see just why and take this away. The comic opens with two of our important characters driving home from an antique show, and right away there's something I don't like. Modern comics, especially DC comics, have a tendency to use uniquely colored narration boxes for characters, so you can know which character is narrating. That's something I do like, but this comic, for its main narrator, chose to use white text on a light blue background for their narration, which honestly is a bit of an eye strain. It's not too much of a problem for me, only a mild annoyance, but I have known several people for whom that would make this comic completely unreadable, and it's a real shame to have people turned away by something as simple as that. There's also a number of things I'm confused about in the beginning here, like the time period. Looking at the ways the characters, Sam and Bernice, are dressed, coupled with that super old-timey looking truck, I started out believing this was supposed to take place in the 1950s, or maybe the 70s, as I suppose she's dressed a little like Jackie O. On top of that, we saw her holding a candelabrum on the cover, and I don't think there's a single cell phone in the entire story. I was also confused by the relationship between Sam and Bernice. They seem to be coming back from a date, and Bernice is talking about how from the moment she met Sam, she knew she wanted them in her life. But when they get home, they get interrupted by another character, Nathan, and look a little like they were caught doing something they shouldn't have been. Though Bernice and Nathan share a kiss, they honestly don't seem that into each other, certainly no more than Bernice is into Sam. Nathan seems much more interested in finishing his book than he is in her. Writers, am I right, ladies? Also, not much later, we see a flashback of the breakup argument between Bernice and another lady, so I wasn't sure if they were trying to suggest that she actually wasn't with Nathan because she was a lesbian, or if they were just declaring her as possibly bisexual or omnisexual or what. I was also confused a little about Sam, who seemed male to me, though Deadman later refers to Sam as a her. But that confusion was probably intentional because it turns out Sam is non-binary, meaning they don't identify with a gender. Or as Bernice says, they're neither man or woman, just all awesome. I love that description. There's also Deadman himself, who is a fairly minor character that not everyone is going to recognize, and yet they explain very little about him in this comic. But chances are perhaps pretty good that if you're picking up a comic where he is literally the title character, then you may already know at least a little bit about former circus daredevil Boston Brand, the ghost left to wander the earth, righting wrongs and helping those in need. So all in all, I feel like this comic could have used some sort of prequel chapter that introduced us more to the place and characters. But the confusion you might be feeling as you muddle your way through the first issue is not really enough to kill the story. Besides, this is quite possibly heavily intentional on the creator's part, as this is a mystery, so confusion is pretty par for the course. That mystery is a ghost story focused primarily on this screaming ghost lady and the history of this ridiculous late-century Gothic mansion called Glencourt Manor. Apparently Nathan, identified as Bernice's boyfriend, inherited the house from an uncle, and so the couple moved out to this remote town to start living there. This was fine for some time, but apparently on this day, as the story begins, the ghost lady began screaming, drawing in Boston Brand's attention. He shows up to help, but for some reason believes the lady is alive, and since the living can't see him, he knows he needs to possess another living person to get them to act. He first attempts to possess Sam, but for some reason can't, so instead he possesses Bernice. But Bernice is also unique because she can apparently see the dead, so she knows Boston is there, and soon she sees him fighting in inky darkness after he leaves her body. Nathan doesn't seem to be able to see the dead, but he does seem to react to the dark figure, getting a sudden headache whenever it's in the same room as him. Not wanting to reveal her sixth sense to her love interests, Bernice rushes Nathan off to his room and Sam out of the house so she can deal with Boston personally. Boston is shocked that she can see and hear him, but quickly explains what's going on to her. Aside from the ghost he heard in need of help, there's a mysterious force field around the house preventing him from leaving it. Now he's stuck here with her and simply trying to help, though she feels he's done far more bad than good. Pretty typical day for Deadman, really. Since he's trapped here anyway, they decide to work together to track down the mystery of the strange ghost lady. In the attic, they find a trunk of her things and a picture from 1875 labeled Adelia Ruskin. They call out to her and she appears, but she touches Deadman and they both disappear, leaving Bernice alone. The two ghosts end up in a dead zone of nothingness. Boston explains to her that she's dead and then attempts to kiss her. Or maybe he's trying out that Silver Surfer absorbing thing. Oh, no, he's mind melding with her to see her memories. That makes more sense. We get a quick flash of her life. Normal stuff like having her portrait painted, her wedding, the building of Glencourt Manor, and her murder. Boston offers his help to find out who murdered her, though, like, come on, it was the husband, right? Together, they manage to get out of the void and return to Bernice, who has been busy trying to learn more about Adelia. She decides there isn't enough information in the house, and since the internet is an unknown foreign thing for this unspecified time period, she needs to go out into the world. Before leaving, she considers telling Nate, but then decides against it because he's in his study, and he has one rule, that she never enters his study. Yeah, that's not suspicious. That doesn't scream that you're dating a supervillain, or Bluebeard. I'm sure Nate, the not-so-great, is totally fine. So Bernice heads out into the world, trudging through the woods on foot because apparently she doesn't even own a car because again, what time period is this? Her journey takes her to the #1 ghost hunting montage spot, the library. She checks through the newspapers, including those on microfiche. Yeah, microfiche. But there may be a hint at the time period here because the newspaper proclaiming nephew inherits Glencourt Manor also seems to have a story about Bloody Sunday in Dublin, putting this in 1920? Well, that can't be right. Must be a different nephew. Guess it's still a mystery. We learned that Adelia married husband Edward Ruskin, and they moved into Glencourt Manor while it was still under construction. She then immediately disappeared, and Eddie left the manor before long in despair. Yeah, sure. Or because you were being haunted by the wife you killed, you murderous bastard. Glencourt passed on from owner to owner until finally Nathan inherits it, but that's all the papers and history books really have to tell us. So Bernice goes to Sam to apologize to them and get their help. While they've been out of the story, they fixed the bull Bernice bought at the antique show mentioned at the beginning of the story, that she accidentally broke the first time Boston possessed her. Thoughtful and sweet. Sounds like you gotta keep her there, B. She even fantasizes a wedding scene, though she claims it came unprompted. Come on, Bernice. What's stopping you? Oh right, Nathan. I guess he's a character. When they get home, he says he's finished his book, and to further celebrate, he gets down on one knee and pops the question. Wait, her name is Bernice Yoon Milonis? What a name! That must be quite the mixed heritage going on there. Wait, those are her boots? What the hell? Did she steal some knight's greaves from a suit of armor? Before Bernice can answer Nate, Adelia goes crazy, turning into the Dark Ink Ghost and sending Nate into an epileptic state. With Nate out for the count and Lady Ghost on the crazy train, our three remaining heroes decide there's only one place left to look for answers: Nate's study. And wow, what a study. Noticing there's no typewriter, no computer, not even a pad and paper. Looks like he was lying about writing that book. Oh, also there's a bunch of books on demons and magics and shit. I guess that's more damning. Wow, Nate is evil. I did not see that coming. A little less obvious, but only a little, is that Nate isn't Nate at all. He's Edward Ruskin. Good thing you didn't say yes, Bernice. You probably would have been murdered in your sleep. Necromancers, am I right, ladies? Because yeah, Nateward is the person who murdered Adelia. Apparently, he used some black magic to tie his life force and her spirit to the house. As long as Glencourt stood and she remained in its walls, he would live forever, as they discover when Sam stabs Nate, only to have him laugh the mortal wound off. Realizing Glencourt is both his strength and weakness, Bernice decides it's time to burn this mother down. She calls to Adelia, hoping for her to lend her power to help the flames, and Sam and Bernice run from the burning house as it disintegrates around them, leaving nothing but a crater where it once stood. With the house gone, Boston and Adelia are finally freed and meet up with the other couple to say their goodbyes. Adelia moves on, in a figurative sense, while Boston moves on more literally, off to aid another cry for help, leaving Sam and Bernice and the one item she saved from the burning house, the cracked bowl Sam fixed for her, to finally have a chance at figuring out their feelings for one another. Which I think are pretty clear at this point, so let's get to the breakdown. While reading this comic, I couldn't help but be struck by how fairly typical of a ghost story it is. If you were to write a vague plot summary without talking about the specifics of the characters, you'd probably be left saying, of course, obviously. And I think that's probably pretty intentional, because the characters are hardly the ones you would probably be expecting to read about in such a story, and that contrasts very nicely with the almost vanilla backdrop. I found myself really liking Bernice as the main character. She's enthusiastic, caring, and intelligent. I really like also that her body type leans a little more towards the plus side than pretty much any other comic book main female lead I can think of, and I really appreciate that there isn't a single moment of fat shaming in the entire comic, or gay bashing, or non-binary hating. Everyone is allowed to just be who they are without question, without criticism, without hate. Even Nate, the wife-killing bastard that he is, isn't really presented in a negative light. And, despite the generic ghost tale of it all, it's a really well-told story, and the art is by and large gorgeous, though it can be just a little inconsistent. Wrap all those things together, and you can see why I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. If pretty much the worst thing I can say about a comic is that some of the narration boxes are a little hard to read, it must be a pretty good comic. Hello everybody, and thanks for watching. I have just a couple more weeks of some other comics before I jump back into the final two parts of the Infinity series. Honestly, it's been kind of nice taking a break and reading some other stuff, even if I do love the series as a whole. I'm really looking forward to next week's video, as it's something pretty different. Hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.